Hi, everyone. We are back with Seth. We're going to reset the program. We had technical difficulties. Seth, you are a security analyst. You live in Israel. You are from Maine, USA, originally. You have been with us, Kurds, in Rojava in our fight against ISIS. We also follow you in the current conflict, Israel after the 7th October. You follow closely and you inform us about all the happenings. So welcome to Nation on the Rise. Thank you for supporting us.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, so we are going to make a reset. I'm sorry for that. But the first question was the current conflict and the war Israel is in. What are the reasons for people to maybe refresh their memory, and what are the eventual goals for Israel?
Well, the current conflict began on October 7th, 2023, with an attack on Israel by Hamas and other terrorist groups that are backed by Iran and Turkey and Qatar and Russia, apparently. It involved thousands of people attacking, and they killed more than 1,000 people, many of them civilians. They kidnapped 250. They destroyed communities, they burned people, they massacred people, they killed children and elderly people. They just the worst possible crimes against the most vulnerable unarmed people, including many people at a music festival. So that began the war, and Israel has been fighting now against Hamas for more than a year, about 400 days, and also fighting now against Hezbollah and other Iranian-backed groups. All of them chose to join this conflict. So Israel's goals in Gaza are to defeat Hamas military capabilities, terrorist capabilities, and to free the hostages, of which there are still 101 of them held there. So it's a very difficult war. There's been a lot of fight, a lot of destruction, a lot of suffering. And in Lebanon, the goal is to return the Israeli evacuees, of which there are 60,000 of them, who had to be evacuated from the border because of the Hezbollah threats and attacks. So they want to return them. So it's a lot of different goals to accomplish, and it's a very difficult conflict.
Okay, why did the war expand to now first Lebanon, and now it expands to Israel, and then it went all the way to Iran? Is it because Hamas connections?
Well, Hamas is a powerful organization. It dates from the 1980s, but it's grown exponentially more powerful in the last decade and a half, controlling Gaza. And Hamas is backed by Qatar. It's hosted by Qatar. It's backed by Turkey. It's hosted by Turkey. It has members in Lebanon. It has backing from Iran for its different types of programs. I mean, each part of the Hamas backing, I think, it gets different things from each group. I mean, from Iran, it gets technology for missiles and rockets. And from Turkey, it gets other things. And Qatar, I think it gets money and also legitimacy. So it's a complicated organization to fight. It's not just a terrorist group like Al-Shabaab or some. It's actually in many ways more powerful than ISIS because it has this international backing. I mean, Turkey is a member of NATO, and Qatar is a major non-NATO ally of the United States. So this is not the same as ISIS. ISIS was opposed by, I think, 70 countries in the world. No one was openly backing them, although you can argue that ISIS received 50,000 volunteers from all over the world. So obviously they were being backed. And some countries seem to have turned the other way in terms of backing them. But I think it's different with Hamas. So it's much more difficult to defeat an organization like that. And I think Israel, has an upward struggle.
May I ask you a question? Every time we hear on the news, Gaza is a very small place and it's a prison for the Gazans there, and etc. How come in such a small place that Israel controls 100%, these people that were kidnapped cannot be rescued?
Well, that's probably $1 million question. I mean, I think that probably they can be rescued by military force, but it would require the chance of risking the lives of the rescuers and risking the lives of the hostages. So I guess it's considered to be maybe too difficult. Gaza is a small place, but small doesn't make things easier necessarily because you have an area that is a lot of it's urban. So it's imagine trying to rescue 100 people being held by a mafia cartel in Manhattan in the subway system somewhere. I mean, it's not easy, and I think historically, when groups like the other terrorist groups, for instance, like the FARC in Colombia, or the cartels used to kidnap people, rescue operations don't always work, and they're not always mounted. Like this pirates in Somalia I think they have lots of foreigners hostages. But most countries don't rescue them, so it's not an easy thing. It's not an easy moral question whether it's good to risk their lives and the lives of the rescue forces. I personally think it's good. It's better to risk lives than leave people somewhere. But I think maybe my opinion may be a minority opinion.
Okay, so Gaza is one, and then the Hezbollah was attacking, and the Houthis were attacking. Israel had to intervene in south of Lebanon. The number was 150,000 rockets that were there to be pressed a button to attack to Israel at any time, right? And it was ongoing. So Israel had a very well planned operation to take down the leadership of Hezbollah. Houthis are a bit far, but they also have military capability to attack Israel. And Iran is openly declaring that it will do their best to annihilate Israel. So in this security situation, and in view of the October 7th attacks, now Israel has seen what happens when the enemy enters Israel. They kill people randomly, whoever they come across. What are the eventual goals for Israel current conflict? You mentioned when Israel was declared as a nation, it was British-backed countries that actually attacked Israel, and they won. So I don't think security situation has changed much.
Did we lose you now? No. Sorry, what was the question?
The question is what are the eventual goals? Like Israel, we see attacking Iran. Israel, we see attacking Houthis. What are the eventual goals? Do you think this current conflict has an end goal, or is it just a continuation since 1947, 1948, and it's going to continue like that?
No, I mean, in some ways, yeah, it has its roots, obviously, a long time ago. I mean, but the groups change and the backers change. I mean, Iran used to be a friend of Israel up until 1979, so the Shah's Iran was perfectly nice country to Israel, and now it's the Islamic Republic, so they don't like Israel, and they took the mantle of anti-Israelism from the Arab nationalists like Gamal Abdel Nasser. So there's some shift, but I guess the overall picture is kind of the same, yeah, in the sense that Israel will always face, I guess, lots of enemies. It's a question of how strong the enemies are. I think that the Islamic Republic, with its ballistic missiles and nuclear program, shows that it has some strength. And the export of drones to the Houthis and the Iraqi militias represents a new type of threat. And Hezbollah, with its has been weakened, but remember, it has not. I don't think it's been weakened as much as it was going back to 2006. It only had 13,000 rockets in 2006. Even if 80% of the rockets are destroyed, it still has 40,000 rockets. So, these groups are far too powerful. That's the problem. These terrorist groups should never have become basically states. And I think it's a misnomer to call them terrorist group. I mean, we're talking about groups that ate away a state. Think of the state like an apple and a bunch of animals inside the apple eating it away until there's no apple left. It's just whatever is that. So the state was eaten away, and there is no state left. It's these groups, and therefore it's unfair to pretend that they are just a group. They're a terrorist group, yes, but they're also a miniature state. So I think that's the problem we face in the region.
Okay. And how about the rise of anti-Semitism in the world? I observe it here. Actually, mostly it's subtle, but it's always in between the lines. How is it perceived in Israel? Like, for example, what happened in Netherlands? Yes, it was about a football game. It was back and forth, but at the end of the day, it turned into an anti-Semitic event. How are these perceived by the Israelis in Israel, and maybe the global Jewish diaspora?
I think Israelis are used to the fact that there's a lot of anti-Israel views, and that not only that, but anti-Israel obsession, which is links far right, far left, some Arab or Muslim communities abroad or in the region, whatever. I mean, I think Israel is used to this kind of multi-layered cake of hatred, and which blends anti-Israel with anti-Semitism. So I would say that the fact that Israel's used to that makes it kind of, it's not acceptable, but I'm saying Israel's used to being abused in this way. I think it's harder for the diaspora community because, there was a time in the 1970s or 80s or 90s when there really was, I think, a low level of anti-Semitism. I mean, look, there's always people, we have to remember that you have people in the West who have different types of anti-Jewish views, but there was a quite low level in terms of, I think, and certainly violent anti-Semitism had really decreased to very low amounts. But the Western governments who have decided to be tolerant at home but accept intolerance at the same time, have allowed or encouraged some of the minorities and immigrants to express anti-Semitism, and they have become appeasers and tolerant of it. And by the way, it doesn't just affect Jews. As you are, I'm sure, familiar, there are extremist Turkish nationalists who are attacking Kurds in places like Germany with the Grey Wolves or whatever.
Yeah.
There are anti-Kurdish riots and manifestations in France, I think also in the Netherlands or Belgium, maybe in England. There is also anti-Hindu violence. There is look, these countries have invited sectarianism in. They invited there's nothing wrong with immigration, but if you allow a lot of people in and you don't teach them, okay, now you come in, it's fine. Now you should be nice. If you allow people in who come from places where they spent the last 100 years persecuting minorities, and then you say, great, come in, but now you can also persecute the minorities here, you end up with that. So unfortunately, in Europe, they have replicated the 1930s style anti-Semitism with a lot of new forms of it. And if they don't put a check on it, then they will end up with this kind of riots and violence. And that's tragic.
Yeah. So Seth, I don't know if you know the name Vera Saidpour. Have you heard of her?
I don't think so.
Vera Saidpour is maybe the first true Kurdologist in the world. She's a Jewish woman. She falls in love with a Kurdish man in New York. They get married, and she dedicates her life to Kurdish people through her love. And she creates a great library. She friends with Mirdad Izadi, one of the first true modern Kurdish historians. And she has a big library still in one of the universities in New York. I'll not remember the name. When New York Times interviews her before she passes away, because she plays such a prominent role in the modern history of Kurds, many Kurds not aware. And they ask her what if the connection that she has with Kurds. And she answers that it's about the Jewish people, she says, and maybe there is this deep-rooted sadness between the two peoples that connects us. So we Kurds, we always feel alone. We don't have friends. Like whenever Kurds are cited globally, they will say Kurds have a saying, "No friends but mountains." But more and more, like I'm now almost 50 years old. When growing, what I would hear from the Kurdish prominent people, not openly, not overtly, but our friends would be the Jewish. Now, what I'm observing more and more, when there's a demonstration, Israeli demonstration, one Kurd, unorganized, goes with the Kurdish flag. And this becomes more visible. And the same thing that we observe sometimes in some of the Kurdish demonstrations, there's a Jewish guy that pops up, or a woman, with the Israeli flag. And this excites the Kurds. This excites the Kurds. I think the main reason is because Israel is victorious. Israel is not falling down. Israel does not swallow. Israel hits back, defends its own. And we see like the comments of the incoming Israeli Foreign Minister, Gideon Sa'ar, that he said there are minorities in the region. One of he named Druze and the Kurds, and he said these are the natural allies. This excited us all. What did he really mean?
Well, I think that, a lot of Israelis support the Kurdish people, And I think we see that as a very genuine, deep connection that transcends politics in Israel. It's on the left, on the right. So, I think that you see that deep support, and there is a deep connection there. There's a sense that the Kurdish people in the region have faced the same enemies and same discrimination as Jews. So I think it's seen as a connection that goes beyond just pragmatic politics. They see that the Saddam regime was gassing the Kurds. Saddam, when he was powerful, posed as the most anti-Israel leader in the region, and he fired Scud missiles at Israel in 1991, I think. And not only that, Israel had to bomb the nuclear reactor in Osirak in Iraq, because he would have done the same thing to Israel as he did to the Kurds. It's obvious that he was on the same, marching in the same direction, this guy. And look at the Islamic regime in Iran is also generally is persecuting Kurdish dissidents or hanging them, and it's an enemy of Israel. And the Syrian Arab Republic, or Assad's regime in Syria, was suppressing Kurds for many years. I think they were denying them even citizenship, persecuting their names. And now we see the same thing with Turkey, although Turkey is a bit of a more mixed, complicated story, because it used to be a friend of Israel when it was actually a Kemalist, nationalism. And but now you can see the way in which Turkish nationalism and this Islamist extremism combines into an anti-Kurdish racism and anti-Israel, and with aspects of anti-Semitism. So it's all connected. I think that Israelis understand that, and they see the contradiction and the lies, because Turkey, for instance, is illegally occupying part of Cyprus. It's illegally occupying Afrin. And the Turkish regime is then accusing Israel of occupation or whatever. I mean, this is the Turkish government that every time there is some small accident in Turkey, claims some massive terrorist conspiracy and bombs random people in Syria and Iraq for no connection to it. I mean, there is not even a connection. And the same one is complaining about Israel fighting terrorism when Israel is actually fighting real terrorism, which is openly on video, in which you see the Hamas guys killing people. So it's not some made up story. So I think this is a connection we see.
Like when you mentioned illegally occupying, you're obviously referring to the international law, illegal under the international law. But there's also the moral stance. Like from my perspective, I'm a Kurdish person. We have our own history. We believe in our land, Kurdistan. It was written until the Turks said there was no Kurdistan, there is no Kurd. But the reality is we are Kurdish. We have our own distinct history, culture, language, and we have millennia of history. And when I hear the word occupied land from the Persians and the Turks, I'm like, what right do the Turks have over Kurdistan? What rights do the Iranians, the Persians have over Kurdistan, over Balochistan, over Khuzestan, where the Arabs live in Iran? Like, for example, what do the Saudi Sunnah has as right over the lands of the Shia? The historic, they don't like each other. They don't consider each other the same people. So occupied lands is obviously a big word to say. There is the international law of the recognized borders, and then there is the moral side of it. So I agree with you 100%. The legitimacy of Turkey is much less than the legitimacy of the Israel, if there was such a thing. But you mentioned nationalism, and Kurds we're becoming more nationalist. However, our common friend, I think, Andrew Fox, when I was interviewing him, we were discussing about obviously the ongoing conflict and possible border changes in the region, which we are volunteering for to liberate our country. He mentioned there is no Kurdish agency to act for Kurds. There are Kurdish actors. In Rojava, we have the PYD in Syrian Kurdistan. In Iraqi Kurdistan, we have the Hewler government and the two prominent parties, PDK, the Kurdistan Democrat Party, and YNK in Soleimani. But there's no real Kurdish agency there. As a security expert yourself, who knows, actually, you follow the Kurds closely, do you think there is hope for Kurds because of everything that goes on? And what would you recommend to the Kurds as a friend for developing a Kurdish agency to act for our own? I don't know if you agree to my comment, though.
Well, you're right. I mean, the Kurdish people have the unfair accident of history of being divided between different countries. That's now that today that's partly the result of the colonial borders, but also just not that, because they are people that were living in the mountainous areas between Persia and the Ottoman empires. So it's not they were a vulnerable, weaker people. And they ended up underneath these empires and then underneath the states. And that's not just them. I mean, the Baluch people are stuck in Iran and Pakistan, and they would maybe like a small state as well. I mean, some people were lucky enough to get their own little countries. Like, for instance, why are there 3 or 4 Gulf states? Each one is kind of just one family. And there is not 4 Kurdish states or 2 or 3 Jewish states in the region. I mean, it's unfair. It's an unfair reality. But I do think the current Kurdish politics you discussed is a complicated one as well, because you mentioned the PYD and you mentioned the KDP, which is the more powerful one in the northern Iraq, and the PUK, which is a slightly weaker party. These divisions sometimes make state building more complicated, in the sense that the northern Iraq autonomous Kurdistan region is the most closest the Kurds ever got to a state, and it is almost a state. I mean, it's certainly more of a state than some states are, in the sense that it has airports and things, and it has an army and things like that. So it's quite close to pseudo state status. I think that, as we saw with the referendum in 2017 and other things, there is a lot of opposition to any Kurdish aspirations in the region, and every time they get closer, lots of countries will work to divide them, or at the worst, they will invade the region. So we saw the conspiracy after the referendum to take Kirkuk back by the Iraqi federal government, which I think that conspiracy was, openly, basically, kind of backed by the West as well.
Yes.
And then we have the fact that the Kurdish parties are linked to other countries. So the PUK tends to be closer to Iran for historical reasons. And by the way, there's nothing wrong with that. I think that actually some people misunderstand perhaps the Kurdish connection to Iran, which is that during the time of the Saddam regime and the suppression by the Turks and the Syrian Arab Republic, the Iranian regime was actually the one that was easiest in terms of Kurdish refugees, and the suppression there was less. I mean, they were not gassing people. So it's natural that the PUK is close to Iran. It's understandable. KDP is closer to the Iraqi to the Turkish government.
Yes.
Again, it's understandable. And by the way, when Erdogan first was running, he ran as a candidate who was actually got Kurdish votes, because not only is he conservative, and there are Kurds that are conservative in eastern Turkey who rejected the far left Kurdish politic types. So that's okay. It's understandable. Mm-hmm. There's going to be right and left in every politics.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But also Erdogan promised to transcend the Kemalist Turkishness with Islam, and Islam is, gives you the veneer of equality as a ethnic group, right? You can be a Kurdish, you can be, you can be whatever you'd like. You can be Malaysian, whatever. You can be from Sudan, okay. So it transcends ethno-nationalism. So one can understand that. But anyway, the Kurds are divided, but I think they are divided like any polity. I mean, the American people are divided between Trump and Kamala. I mean, Mexico is a divided country. I mean, unfortunately, Kurdish politics, the divisions are more extreme because it's not Denmark. It's stuck in the Middle East. So everyone is preying on it. And I think they're stuck between this very big powers, because Kurdistan region is not in Jordan, which is which is a state in the middle of it was a desert or something. Now it's a kingdom. That's fine, but the Kurds are stuck between the most powerful countries. So they are really ground between them, and it makes the political divisions more extreme somehow. Mm-hmm. I would say that I think they've done a very good job in northern Iraq, although many Kurds, of course, will disagree, and they don't think the government in Erbil is great. They see it as a tribal family government or whatever. But tribal family governments are not always bad in the region. There's lots of them. So I mean, there is the Eastern Syria. Look, in Eastern Syria, I think they have an impossible challenge because the Americans will leave. They should not pretend that America will stay forever, and no one should trust the West ever in terms of this thing of the West is there to free me. The West has almost always betrayed the people it helped, not because the West is evil. It's just that it's the nature of the game. The West doesn't, it gets bored easily. It doesn't have time for whatever reason. So they have a difficult problem in Eastern Syria, and they have very powerful enemies in Turkey, and I don't know how they will bridge that gap. They ostensibly have friends, some not these days as much, but they used to have some closer connections with the regime in Damascus, or with PYD is close to YPG, which is ostensibly close to PKK or whatever, but which has some connection with some sort of okay relations historically with Iran. Unclear. So, but they are in an impossible position in Eastern Syria, and I think that the chances of that polity surviving is slim, but I would say that if it does survive under the Syrian regime, it will not go back to what was there in I don't think in 2013. Yeah. It will have some, maybe it can get a little bit of autonomy, but you saw how difficult that was in Afrin, how easily it was destroyed. Correct. So I would say that they should be very careful and realistic, I guess, in terms of trying to figure out what to do next.
I agree with you. Okay, so my last question is that the Jewish and the Kurdish people, we see each other more and more closer, as I was mentioning. When there's a Israeli demonstration, we see a Kurdish guy just popping up with the Kurdish flag, and vice versa. This makes us happy. We want to see that the Kurds, Israel is an inspiration to Kurdish people. The fact that it's success. Despite all the challenges, the fact that it's there, it's successful, and it's not bending down to its enemies. It hits back. It defends its own. This is a true inspiration for Kurds. Like recently, the Theodor Herzl book, the foundational work on Israel, has been published in Kurdish, and there is an interest in Kurds, how Israel was established, how the Jewish people do that. And we observe closely all the Kurds, like whenever we hear, oh, this guy in Israel is actually a Jewish Kurd, that's the term we use. It makes us happy. But there's historical connection, deep historical connection between the Kurds and Israel. What do you know about that? And how do you see the future? I'm not talking about anything political, just the connection between the two peoples. What's our history, to your knowledge, how you perceive it, and what do you think is in the future for us?
Well, it's interesting. I mean, there are, as you mentioned, there are many Kurds, Jews. I don't know if you call them Kurdish Jews or Jewish Kurds, or
we say Kurds. Jewish Kurds.
So
whether it's right or wrong, but that's how we call it.
There are lots of them that immigrated to Israel, and they have areas in Israel where there are many of them, especially Jerusalem, where I live. I think that half my neighbors, by the way, found out that they are also Kurdish. So this whole neighborhood I live in, I think, is Kurds. Somehow they're all Kurdish. Of course, you know that they are coming. The Kurds, they come to Israel. They came to Israel. They came in complicated ways before the state. Some after the state. Some came from what is now Turkey. Some came from what is now Iran. Some of them came from all over the place. In many cases, they came from states that no longer exist, right? I mean, from the Ottoman Empire or something. I mean, like for them, there was no difference between traveling from Mosul to Derek or Qamishli or to go to Sanli Urfa or whatever, and then to go to what is parts of Iran now. It will all be the same area. It does now. It's some different state, but these areas are close to each other. Anyway, I think we have a special connection. I think Jews and Kurds do. I think it's a connection that is building over time, but I think it's nothing. These are difficult times. I mean, Israel's under siege as it has never been before by all this evil terrorist groups. The Kurdish people are under siege. And I think also in the past, sometimes Kurds felt that Israel will be able to help them more against their enemies. And they found out that there is not a magic wand in terms of Israel's support. I mean, Israel has friends in Washington. It has friends in the incoming Trump administration, of course. It looks like it looks like this will be the most pro-Israel administration, I guess, ever in American history or something. But as we learned, the last Trump administration, the Trump administration was the same one that was saying to the Syrian area, okay, we're leaving. I mean, so it doesn't necessarily connect to B in the sense that there was no magic wand, I think, that Israel could use to prevent the disaster that unfolded in Afrin and Sarkania. So these are not simple, easy times. I think that nevertheless, I think there is this deep connection that we see in the region. We see the personal relationship that develops between Kurds and Jews, especially when they meet. You meet people in Europe or other places, and we find that those are the group that you can trust. Kurds, for instance, you will generally find very little or no anti-Semitism among them. You will not find that they are part of these gangs that are attacking people. You will find friends among that community. You will find an instant relationship with them, like in a university or something, that they feel a connection as a persecuted people or facing the same enemies, whether it's Arab nationalism or Turkish nationalism or Islamism or whatever. So you find that immediate bond with people that have certain commonalities. So yeah, I think that will develop hopefully, and I think it's a special thing. So that's a good thing. But again, we face very difficult times ahead in the region. These are not easy days ahead, I don't think.
Okay. Thank you very much, Seth, for your time. It was a pleasure to have you.